Dear Capcom, first, allow me to say thanks for delivering installments in an award-winning franchise for the past nearly 20 years. I've had fun with all of your 20 games in the franchise, even if less so Degeneration on the N-Gage and Operation Raccoon City. Still, there are rumors for the next game, and I write this with the express intent of helping you focus on what has worked and what needs improvement with the Resident Evil main titles, as well as give a few ideas for material fans and newcomers would gladly pay for. You get a best-selling game, and we get the game we've been asking for. It's a win-win. For brevity, I've arranged 7 things you can consider including in Resident Evil 7 to earn another critical and commercial success before you consider closing the books and rebooting the series. Number 1. The story. Allow me to remind you that part of what made early Resident Evils such as 1, 2, Code Veronica, and 4 such an enjoyment is the story accompanying the action. A lot of mystery, suspense, and clever subplots riddled these games and added tremendously to the player's curiosity and imagination while playing. For example, in the very first game, we unravel the mystery of the monsters in the mansion, and then the dark secret of Umbrella, and then Wesker's plot underneath all of it. Recently, while games like Revelations and 6 may have been fun, but they mostly added to the lore and the world building, they didn't really contain as strong a focus on the situation at hand, leaving players like me to care little about what's going on past entertaining cutscenes or gameplay. For example, having the 4 intertwining campaigns in Resident Evil 6 wasn't bad, but it did come off as pandering towards crowds that favored that campaign's particular gameplay style. Leon for survival, Chris for action, Sherry for puzzles, and Ada for stealth. However, separating them was exactly the problem. In the past, Resident Evil games have had separate character campaigns, sure, but as they have proven, the iconic Resident Evil experience is all of those elements blended together, not separate and mutually exclusive. You know, for a plot freebie, may I suggest wrapping up the second arc of the series, the Parasite arc, with a plot building off the lead-in movie to Resident Evil 6, the CGI movie, Resident Evil Damnation. The movie laid the foundation for a clever combination of the first viral arc and the second Parasite arc by giving us classic viral monsters controlled and infected by parasites. The fusion was intriguing, entertaining, and a treat for old and new school fans. Better story doesn't have to be more complicated, just more interesting, which leads me to the next point. Number 2. Characters. For any good story to work, you need characters the audience cares about. For a game that could act as a finale, this is a great opportunity to wrap up recurring veteran main characters that haven't seen a gameplay return except as mercenaries cameos, such as Barry Burton, Rebecca Chambers, and Claire Redfield. You also have veteran survivors from their own games that can come back, like the often forgotten Bruce McGivern. Given how he works for the US anti-terrorism branch and survived an outbreak, he seems good for another game. There's also Leon's friend, Thompson, who is another outbreak veteran. Maybe even wrap up something for Hunk, too. You can see the deep bench of veterans to not only wrap up stories for, but are potential new leads in another adventure. Every game so far has featured at least 2 protagonists you can play as, either separately or at the same time, so it's fine to keep that up. Between Chris, Jill, Barry, Rebecca, Leon, Claire, Sherry, and even Bruce and Ark, with Ada and Hunk on the side, the time is right to now set up an all-stars team with a deep bench to take on the challenge. How can you do this cleanly? Good question. Let's talk about the sensitive subject next. Number 3. Co-op. Given how social gaming has gotten, a partner-oriented series like Resident Evil lends itself naturally to that. Co-op itself is not a problem. It's great, though I think your scenario work has room for improvement. For example, you need to have a more complex usage for your partners other than flanking enemies and pushing 2 buttons at the same time. For example, the Chris and Jill side content in Resident Evil 5, Lost in Nightmares, was a throwback to the original Spencer Mansion, but the blend of traps, puzzles, thrills, and action, while also being co-op and actually relying heavily and separately on your partner, was spot on. And that is a great framework to expand upon. It was a breath of fresh air and proof, Capcom, that you could still make it work, honestly. Looking outward, consider the Resident Evil-like cousin, Dead Space, more particularly Dead Space 3, where having a partner meant accessing new areas and side missions specific for the 2 players that are normally inaccessible as a solo player. In addition, extra banter and character-specific reactions come with each player. Take that, blend it together with Lost in Nightmares, and maybe here's one possible option. Imagine this. You have multiple campaigns at different locations, and you pick your agent from the roster of up to 11 veterans that I just named. Maybe 3 or 4 agents can be at a particular site, sure. But in addition, each character, like in Mercenaries, has different stats, attacks, dialogue, weapon bonuses, and even costumes. In that campaign stage, if solo, the character says things specific to them and their outlook on it, or in relation to their motivation. For example, at certain points, Leon or Barry may crack a joke, or Jill or Chris may give their analysis on something. If 2 players are cooperating, then characters can have banter between them that is unique to that relationship. Come on, Capcom, when you do it for every crossover game you make, you can do it again. Now, suggested pairings can be the canon for the game's story, but the players could and should be free to play as other agents too. Speaking of which... Number 4. DLC crossover. Resident Evil and Dead Rising. Think about this. Capcom, you like your cameos and crossovers, it's okay to do it here too, and if you do it right, I'm sure no one would mind paying the DLC or buy a compilation version of the game. For example, how about a DLC with a what-if scenario crossing over Resident Evil and Dead Rising? When you did it for the 3DS crossover game Project Cross Zone, it made perfect sense. Now, bring it to life again. Then, possibly having Frank West as a partner to play in the main game would be awesome. You know, if Bruce and Ark can't cut it as main agents, perhaps have them as DLC with their own little mini adventures, or HD remakes of small portions of their games with modern gameplay. Ark can go back to blasting his way through Sheena Island again, and Bruce can survive the Spencer Rain ocean liner a la Revelations all over again. What I mean to say is, make DLC worth it by having the meat of an expansion in it, while also giving something fresh. Again, Lost in Nightmares was a great benchmark. $5 for a mini-adventure where it's evident effort was put into its design and execution, with fresh monsters and environments. More of that, please. Number 5. Multiplayer. Now, past co-op, the next stage is multiplayer. Now, multiple multiplayer modes have been tried with varying amounts of success in the past, so let's keep it simple and stick to what works. First, your bestseller, Mercenaries mode. All I have to say is, keep up the good work and keep it for the next game, it's fine. Since Resident Evil 2, you've had great minigame side content, so you know what you're doing there. In fact, an HD Easter egg unlocking Tofu as a character would be much appreciated. Next, Agent Hunt in Resident Evil 6 was a great game mode that I personally found addictive and more entertaining at times than the main game. Jumping into someone else's game as one of the monsters, using that monster's abilities, and earning rewards for your own game based on your performance was another masterstroke that I highly suggest keeping for your next game. Bravo! Now here's a point I am very serious for, listen carefully. Back on the PlayStation 2, you had a pair of Resident Evil games that were fantastic, yet far ahead of their time technology-wise. Before DayZ, before Left 4 Dead, it was Resident Evil Outbreak Files 1 and 2. A 4-player online campaign where people pick their unique survivor with their own skills and loadout and work together across a long chain of episodes of campaign locations, some of which from the main game itself. Do that again with today's technology. Heck, make it a separate game if you want to, it's worth it, and long overdue. Number 6. Ironically, more puzzles, less QuickTime events. These go together, I feel. I went ahead and reviewed the main Resident Evil games, not including any side games or content. I tallied up the number of puzzles in each one, puzzles being any challenge or obstacle that needs some level of problem solving to overcome. I chose to arrange the games chronologically to make a point on what I think is fairly obvious. Take a look at this. As the series has gone on, Capcom, you've taken away a huge amount of the core gameplay. Maybe you think the co-op-centric ones demanded less puzzles to keep the pace going, but I don't buy that. Now, I didn't chart it, but I'm sure QuickTime events have increased as the series went on. I think you see the problem trend. Simple answer. Please, less QuickTime events, more puzzles please. The indulgence of QTEs seemed to bleed out any of the deadly surprises and traps the series used to enrich the experience. 4 introduced the QTE or die, and did a tolerable job of not going too far, though for me I'm not really a fan of mashing buttons. Resident Evil 5 replaced death traps with QTE or die sequences, and 6 seemed to feature them a little too frequently. Number 7. Cinematic Survival Horror. You know, it's one thing to consider that true, back in 1996, we were all younger and easier to scare, and Resident Evil made waves with a cinematic horror story. Haunted house, blind corners, camera angles, and techniques from our favorite scary films, it did it all. These days, the genre is alive and well, and though entries come every year both big and small, it seems the only game series to actually carry the torch and inherit Resident Evil's signature flavor blend of movie-style horror, action, puzzles, story, monsters, and survival is Dead Space. Dead Space unfortunately evolved to leave less and less to the imagination with its monster scenario designs, but that's exactly where Resident Evil 7 can pick up the torch again and keep running. Now Capcom, ignore the contrarians that insist non-combat games like Amnesia, Outlast, and Slender Man are pinnacles of horror and it cannot be done with an empowered hero. They're fine games, however, what made Resident Evil great was that your weapons did not empower you against the subtleties and entities controlling the situation around you. It was your wits that got you through, and a bullet for everything else. Bring back the survival aspect of it all. Let us feel the weight and deliberation behind our actions and choices again. Give us open-ended environments with optional areas again to challenge our courage and curiosity to explore. Give us back sick, tormented reminders of the tragedy all around. Don't go for the cheap scares, go for the deep-rooted seed of caution and doubt that will progressively bloom to the subconscious horror within us the more we must be forced to think about it. Concerning the cinema aspect of it, I don't suggest going back to the predetermined camera angles per se, but you need to get a little more creative with tricks against the mind and eye when it comes to the over-the-shoulder camera. Shinji Mikami, the original creator of Resident Evil, has that in mind with his upcoming Evil Within, so I suggest taking notes and getting creative on your own. Finally, let me close with one last point. I know development costs are very high, but remember back when you used to be halfway done with a game, like Resident Evil 2.5, 3.5, or 4.5, by which the way, each one of those betas had great ideas in them, but you were still willing to scrap it and start all over from scratch to deliver what you thought was a much better game. Remember that? You don't have to waste like that, but I do want that sort of quality commitment again. Capcom, listen to me. When I see you put out games like Dragon's Dogma, which comes out as an exceptional, excellent entry to an already established genre, I know you still have it in you. So, please consider my words good gaming, and I'll see you at the next Outbreak. Thanks for listening.
I got a shotgun.
Chris Redfield. Jill Valentine. Barry Burton. Rebecca Chambers. Albert Wesker. Biohazard.